Now, Napoleon had victory after victory. He actually conquered Moscow, went farther than the Nazis would in World War II. He conquered Moscow in September of 1812. But by this time, his troops were spread out upon a massive front that extended all the way back into Poland. Still, he destroyed Moscow, put fire to as much of it as he could. And Moscow, by the way, was not the capital this time. St. Petersburg still was. And that was his next major target. But then the winter settled in. And Napoleon, stretched out, stretched thin, far from his supplies, and not properly prepared for the winter, began to experience massive losses. It's estimated that nearly 400,000 would die due to exposure, due to illness, and due to the continued battles that the Russians gave during the winter. As they began to withdraw from Russia in somewhat of a disorganized fashion, not having enough wagons to carry all of their wounded, it's estimated that possibly even another 100,000 were taken prisoner. In other words, we've just accounted for his entire army being lost. In fact, estimates range, but it's estimated that roughly 20,000 of the original 500,000 plus army ever made it out of Russia alive. At the same time that this disastrous defeat and his greatest army is happening, the Duke of Wellington, victorious in all of Spain, having driven the French back into France himself, crossed the Pyrenees Mountains and invaded France, taking over several powers to, quote, reduce the power and influence of the grand disturber of Europe. That's what Wellington thought of Napoleon. He was a grand annoyance, and Wellington would deal with Napoleon as such. Napoleon, for his part, didn't stay with his army. He was never loyal to his men. He fled with a handful of his most loyal, closest subjects, because he did need some. He abandoned the rest of his army to try to find their way back. He made it by coach and sleigh in that winter all the way back to Paris in a mere 13 days, which itself was quite a feat. He then went about throughout France raising another brand new army of new recruits, many of them very young, many of them without any real experience in battle. He was ultimately surrounded by the Grand Alliance. This time, the Prussians and the Austrians, for example, as well as the Swedes and the Saxons, the Bavarians, they had all left Napoleon. They had all joined the Russians, and they surrounded him outside the city of Leipzig. And it was there that the famous Battle of the Nations, they completely destroyed Napoleon, who fled back to Paris. He was there in France with whatever remaining soldiers he had in the country of France. He managed to fight somewhat of a campaign, but eventually was defeated and admitted that he had lost the Great War after all. He would ultimately decide to give up his throne as emperor, give up all of his claims upon the various lands of Europe. And they decided, that is, the victors, the Allies, decided to give Napoleon another empire, this time an empire in miniature, when they gave him the small Mediterranean island of Elba, where Napoleon, during the short time that he resided at Elba, actually set up an elaborate palace, actually had his own court, reformed the law code of Elba, designed his own uniforms and flags for Elba, and took his small army of roughly 500 and trained them and drilled them as much as he could.